Hi, Beth. I'm going to go ahead and make you a co-host and then start letting people in.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll do a quick little introduction and remind them about sign in and all that stuff. And then I'll stop talking and just take care of the chat for you.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my screen share is
Yeah,
working.
for sure.
Okay. It's been a minute I've used. Where do I go down to the bottom? I go to share.
So it should be share. And I made you a co-host, so you should,
There it is.
you
Okay.
got it? Okay. Welcome everybody. I'll we're kind of checking just some technical things. Yeah, I can see it.
Perfect. Okay,
Looking
perfect.
good. I'll put the sign in the chat, everybody, but as y'all I'm sure have heard, you've only got to do that once, and then I'll include the program link as well, and we'll let everybody return from lunch and get started shortly.
There we go. I turned my lamp on. It was a little bit dark in here.
Yeah, now you got those stage lights.
I just redid my office this summer and I have one of my mom's antique lamps over here. It just brings me a lot of joy to
I
see.
love that.
Yeah.
we still got just a couple of minutes, guys, before we get started, but I know the waiting room is starting to slow down. So just want to reiterate, I will put again here in just a second, kind of all the relevant links in for today. So the sign in for attendance, which you only have to do once. So if you've done that, if you're with us this morning, you're good. I'll throw the program in there as well. Um, and then I'll include the Power School registration.
Really good to give the girls an
I'll be hanging out in the chat and in the waiting room. But I'll get those posted. And this is the drill for component 4. So if that's where you want to be, great job. You found yourself in the right place. If not, no hard feelings. If you leave us, get where you need to go. But we will go ahead and welcome you all to today's component 4 drill. Really excited to be with you all. Beth Russell is going to be our amazing facilitator for this session. My name is Rachel Goggins. I'm the National Board Support Coach for the Tuscaloosa City Schools. I will be hanging out in the chat, trying to drop relevant links for answering your quick questions. So please feel free to be super engaged in the chat as we go on. We do ask that during the presentation you stay muted. If something happens, I'll try to catch that for you just to make sure we're all able to hear Beth. This is being recorded and slides will be shared, so don't feel frantic about writing everything down. All of this stuff will be coming back to you. You're going to feel like you're drinking from a fire hose. You may already kind of feel like that a little bit. So, and that is okay. That is a very normal feeling. So I will get ready to put those links in the chat, and it's 1:00. So Beth, I will turn it over to you.
All right, awesome. I want to make sure that my screen looks good. Like, do you just see the presentation?
So I do see the bar at the top of like where it says the name of your presentation with the Zoom and the share, but I mean, it's mostly full screen. I welcome any other feedback from other people. I feel like it's easy to see. So
okay, as long as it's easy to see and that's all that you guys see, I'm not going to stress about it, because anytime I try to get into too much complication with Zoom,
okay.
You.
I get it, and the chat is agreeing with me. Everybody feels good about what we see. So if it gets a little sideways, I'll let you know.
Great. All right. Awesome. So I'm really excited to be here with you guys today. I know that component 4 can be a very overwhelming component to go through, especially if you've heard anything about it. But after I went through the process, for some reason, it ended up being my favorite component, and it is just the thing that I really feel that I love the most. So I wanted to share this with you today. And we're just going to be reviewing component 4. This is a little bit about me. So I earned my national board certification in 2023. I currently work for Talladega County Schools at Lincoln High School. I teach 11th grade English. I teach the 9th grade advanced, and I also teach a dual enrollment section of American literature, because that is my favorite thing to teach. We used to have an AP program at Talladega County, but as dual enrollment has kind of started taking over, AP has kind of gone by the wayside. So I do have both my personal email address and my school email address available for you here. If you need anything during the process, please feel free to reach out. I do have some pictures there of both my husband and I. We love to go to JSU football games. And then I have my Alabama shirt on because I'm actually starting my ADD in the fall at Alabama. And I'm very excited to be doing that, in addition to working with National Board. So a little bit about my national board journey. I did complete all of my components in one cycle. You do not have to do that. I'm just a little bit crazy, and I'm kind of an all or nothing type of girl. And when I jump into something, I like to jump all the way in. I am a proud product and mentor with JSU's In-Service Center. I would not have certified without the amazing support center that was there. So I definitely encourage you to reach out to your local in-service center to get in with a cohort. It's very important. I'm currently leading a county level mentorship program in my district. One of my friends, Tammy Bailey, and she earned her national board certification in middle school math, and we decided together that we were going to start our own cohort there in the county on top of what's offered through the in-service center, and that's awesome. I'm currently the only national board certified teacher in my school, but I do have I think, 3 different of colleagues currently going through the process. And so I'm hoping that's going to be a thing of the past very soon. I do want to say that this process is extremely tough, but it has been and is still the most meaningful professional development that I've ever completed. You know, a lot of people get into it and they're, yes, the stipend is nice, and yes, the title is nice. But after you complete this process and you earn your national board certification, because you will earn your certification, you will see that this process is going to drive you crazy during it. But after you're done, you're, wow, that it's still inside of me 2 years later, what I learned and what I went through. So I do want to encourage you to please stop me with the chat. Rachel, if you can just let me know, because I'm not really looking at the chat, you let me know if anyone needs anything. This is the list of things that we're going to go through today. And I have a short question and answer session after each part so that you don't have to wait until the end to ask me questions. I also want to give a huge shout out to Amber Emerson. I've never met her in person, but I watched her C4 video, I'm going to say at least 5 times when I was going through this process. And I feel like she's my personal mentor and my best friend. And probably a lot of the stuff in this session is going to be a repeat of what I learned from her, because I scored a 4 on C4 because of Amber. She was amazing. And all of her tips and tricks, it just made me feel like I understood C4, because it was the most terrifying of all 4 components for me, just because of the size, not because of what it is, but I want to encourage you just not to get bogged down with C4. You plan ahead, you're going to be fine. Okay, so we all know that C4 is the big one, okay? It should really be 4 different components, and it really should be worth way more than 15% of your score, okay? But it's not. You're going to have 4 different things that you're going to work on. First is going to be your knowledge of students. You're going to prove basically that you know your students, you know who your students are, and you're going to show how you collect data about them to inform instruction, okay? The second thing that you're going to do is assessment. You're going to use your knowledge to design assessments for your students. I know that you all are just like me. I have a filing cabinet because I'm an old school girl, and I have all of my little tests and stuff that I've done over the years. And I might give the same type of multiple choice test each year as a formative check when we're reading Gatsby. But at the end of the day, sometimes what I have in my filing cabinet is just not going to work for those kids in that moment. I have to stop, redesign, and redo things. Sometimes my filing cabinet just sits there mocking me because what I have doesn't work. And we know that. So you're going to prove that you're the type of teacher that designs assessments in the moment. You're also going to work on 2 different things here. Your professional learning need, which is number 3. You're going to show how you meet the needs of your students through your own professional development and learning. We all do these things. Yes, we're asked to go to professional developments. Yes, we're forced into professional developments, but you ultimately make a lot more choices than you realize. And I'm willing to bet my life that you advocate for your students and your own professional needs by seeking out professional development that's important to you. That's why you're here today, right? Then finally, you're going to have your student need, and you are going to show how you collaborate with others to advocate for your students' needs, okay? So as we go through this process, just please remember, stop me as we're going through so that you can ask questions. Here is my number 1 tip for national board certification, period, but especially for C4. You need to plan ahead. With C4, you need to start working on this one as soon as the school year starts, okay? Don't be like me. I went through all of the boot camps over the summer. I joined the National Board Facebook groups, and then I started reading my standards, and I froze. I felt intimidated. I felt like I wasn't good enough. I thought to myself, I'm never going to be this person. I'm not this teacher. I've bitten off more than I can chew. And then I spent the entire first semester in my head and freaking out about everything that I had to do. I had my calendars and I was working on some parts of my components, but nothing was clicking. And then something magic happened in January to my brain, and I went into overdrive. I completed component 2 in January and February. Then I did C3 in March, and I did C4 in April. And I literally did them in that order. And I had pieces of C4 done, But it was like until I sat down and started trying to work a form, trying to understand the written commentary, it didn't happen. So don't wait, okay? Read your directions. And when I say read your directions, read them again. Read your standards multiple times, read through those standards. Don't be intimidated by them. You are an accomplished teacher. Be inspired by your standards. Don't do what I did, okay? You're just going to look at what to do and how to collect your data. First thing we're going to start with is your knowledge of students. So for each part of the component, I'm going to review what the component is. I'm going to look at some evidence examples, and then I'm actually going to look at the forms that belong in this component, because there's lots of forms in this component, more forms than any other component. You end up with like 38 pages of files. So if you have any questions specifically about what you're seeing, please feel free to stop me. All right. For your knowledge of students, this is going to be the first thing that you're going to really start on. As soon as you get in August, I bet you give surveys to your students, you reach out to parents, you've talked to the former teachers, you have baseline data, and you have all of these amazing things about your students that you start collecting in August. Keep a roster of these things, okay? You're going to choose a group of students, and this is going to be one rostered class. So for elementary school teachers, you get a class of kids, right? For the high school teachers like me, though, I get 7 different classes, right? So I really had to stop what I was doing, and I had to make some choices about which class I wanted to focus on, okay? This group of students is going to be the focus for your knowledge of students. I will also sometimes call this your KOS. So your knowledge of students and the assessment section. So knowledge of students and assessment section are going to work together with the same rostered class, okay? Don't combine multiple classes. So if you have multiple periods, don't combine your first and your fourth period just because they're both English 11. You pick your first period and you go with those babies all year long, and those are the ones that you work on for C4, okay? You want to also make sure, as with all of them, that they are 51% in your age range for your certificate area. That means that if you're teaching those middle school babies, and I think those are like 11 to 14 years old, I cannot remember that age group for sure. If you have 3 students in there that happen to be 10 years old, it's not going to cause you a problem. Just make sure they're within your age range, okay? You want to start to consider relevant characteristics of the entire class. And these are adjectives. You know that feeling before you start in with a certain class. Oh, this is my rambunctious class. This is the class that talks. This is the quiet class. You have these adjectives in place in your mind to describe this group of students, and that's going to be how I want you to start thinking about this class. How do you describe this group of kids to your colleagues when you're bragging on those kids, when you're stressed out after lunch? How do you describe those students? And you are going to collaborate with others to collect data, okay? This can look like a lot of different things. This could be progress charting, email records, ongoing notes that you keep. I'm an old school girl. Like I've said, I like to keep paper copies of notes, and I make little sticky notes. Sometimes I just slam them on a piece of paper and call it done. These can be conferences that you have with other educators, observations that you have or that other people have made about your students, assessment data, so testing data, baseline data, your dibbles, anything that you can think of, ACAP assessments from the previous year, anything, surveys that you give parents, surveys that you give students, phone calls that you make, discussions that you have with students, with your colleagues, with your principal, whomever. You can collect data from multiple places, families, other teachers, social workers, nurses, other students, counselors, assessment data, data meetings. There's no limit to the places that we do ultimately end up getting data about our students. So don't discount anything that you learn about your students, okay? I want to give you some options for the way that you can show your data, because I find that a lot of people are very confused about how to show evidence for knowledge of students. This is straight from Amber Emerson. Like I said, this is not what I ended up doing, but this is one thing that she recommended. And as I've mentored other candidates, I've seen lots of people do this and do so successfully, okay? They created a spreadsheet. Now, whether this is Google Sheets, this is Microsoft Excel, you do you. You can color code things and you can just create this spreadsheet. You can make yellow for last year's data, green for your own observations, purple gathered from the family, red from the student. I'm not going to read all of them, but you see how to do that. As you create each column, You just color code it. And as you're working through the school year, you type things in. You don't have to do it exactly like this. This is just an awesome recommendation from Amber. And like I said, I've seen this done very successfully. At the end of all of this, you can format the table however you like, and you can either take a screenshot, you can do a PDF print to show your data. You don't have to show all of the data for the entire class, but if you're a formatting guru, have at it and show all of the data on one page. That ultimately ended up being the part that kind of worried me, that I couldn't get everything formatted just the way that I wanted it. And I have a spreadsheet actually for my C4 component that I completed, but I ended up going in a different direction with my evidence. And that's what I'd like to show you is some examples based on the evidence that I successfully used in my component. So does anyone have any questions about the spreadsheet before I go on? Rachel, were they good?
So Beth, I just put Amber's sample in the chat. So Amber's a dear friend and colleague of mine here in Tuscaloosa. So I've already dropped her
I love
video.
her.
I literally just texted her and I was like, girl, you're getting a lot of love today. So guys, I just put a link to a Drive document that we share with our candidates locally that is truly a sample of how Amber recommends setting this up, how I did it. It's how we ask all of our local candidates to do it. We did the question was, would you turn this spreadsheet in for evidence? Yes, this would be one page of your evidence. And then the second page would be, how'd you get that information? Like screenshots, notes, parent surveys, whatever.
Right.
We did have a question about rostered class that I was going to try to look up, but you may know if this is exceptional needs, would a rostered class of inclusion students meet the criteria for the rostering?
While I'm not 100% for sure, I did read for an exceptional needs candidate last cycle. And I do remember that she had her group of students that she would go into a classroom and she would work with them. I still want you to defer to your directions, and I'd like you to try to find an exceptional needs person at your local service center to 100% for sure check on that. But I feel like that's okay. But again, that's not my area. So I would make sure that you double check it.
This is also a time when I would be like, call that 1-800-22-TEACH number. They are lovely on the phone and will be super clear. But otherwise, I will be quiet and see if anybody wants to unmute. But those are the only questions in the chat. So
awesome. All right, now I'm going to show you an example of what I did. I didn't know for sure if anyone else had done this, but as I tell my students, I'm like, we got to risk it for the biscuit, okay? We're going to go in and we're going to do exactly what I do in real life, okay? So this is a blank copy of anecdotal notes and progress monitoring. I had this for one student, okay? I literally had one student who was he was just an interesting kid overall. He had a case manager, he had an IEP, he had all of these different things going on. And now you can see that on this one piece of paper, I hand wrote these things again because I'm old school, but I do something called stairs and stars. What are my students' stars? What things was this student great at? And I wrote those things down. But what were his stairs? What did he need to work on? What were the problems that I had started noticing about this one student? And I had those written down. My county also does pre and post assessment data. So I wrote down his pre-assessment data, his post-assessment data, and I was able to see it on a single piece of paper, what I had going on for this student. I had made observations about this student. I had formative data, and I literally took a screenshot of one student's anecdotal notes and progress monitoring. Again, you can do the spreadsheet. If that's what you want to do, I encourage you to do the spreadsheet because it works. But if you would like to show a single student, that's okay, because you have all of these things, and this wasn't my only piece of data. I had some email chains from parents about different students. I've taken an example over here from Performance Matters. This is not actually what I used during my portfolio, but it's an example of a pre and post assessment that we gave. And if I had more information in there about maybe the standards that was assessing or some other information, I'm showing my whole class of students where they were at this moment, and that can be very valuable information. So if you want to show some sort of data like that, just do that. As long as you're showing your data from two different sources, right? You got to prove that you're getting evidence from two different sources, go for it. Do the spreadsheet or do something a little bit different. You could do the spreadsheet and something like this. These are valid options to show. Don't freak yourself out over, can I put this in here? Can I put this in here? Yeah, black out the names of your students. If you have emails, add some little blocks on there to take out the names and any other identifying information. I had an email chain about how I had a student who was an autistic student. I couldn't really reach her, and her mom told me that she loved Attack on Titan. So I actually, when I put her copy of the assessment in, I had made an Attack on Titan reference on her assessment, and she got it. And so I had example of how I used information that I had gotten from mom to help my student make it through her assessment more successfully. So you do these things all the time, feel comfortable with it. All right, we're going to look at our form now. This form is my favorite form, okay? You don't hear people say things like this, but the forms in C4, I want you to think of them as an appetizer because they really are. They do a lot more work than any other components, okay? So the first one that you're going to complete, you're going to have a contextual information form. That one's completely separate. You can ask me questions about that one if you need to, but that one's generally similar from component to component. I'm going to look at the forms that are specialized for C4. Okay. For your group and information profile form, on each one of your forms at the top, there's a gray box and it tells you what to do. It's going to tell you how many pages you get for the form, and then it's going to tell you how many pages of evidence, if any, that you're going to merge with that form when you go to submit. Okay, so for this form, you're going to have 2 pages of single spaced Arial 11 point font. You usually don't do single spaced except for on your forms. In your written commentary, you're double spacing all the time. So I'm thinking to myself, 2 pages single space, that makes me feel an awful lot like 4 pages. So I get a lot of information here, okay? Now, for question number 1, I recommend that you use bullet points or numbers for question number 1. And then you're going to detail the sources that you chose for your students. Take a look at the question. It says, describe the information. It doesn't say what information did you gather, and you're just going to say, I had assessment data, I talked to teachers, I talked to counselors. It says describe. So when National Board tells you to describe or list or identify, pay attention to those words. It wants a description, okay? This is going to focus on the entire class, all of your kids, and you're going to share patterns, trends, and data that you've noticed about your group of students. And I want you to be specific here. 25% of my students struggle with what? What are they struggling with? They're struggling with citing evidence. They're struggling with grouping like numbers. They're struggling with negatives and positives. They're struggling with the diphthongs. Whatever they're struggling with, 25% of your kids, the whole class, struggle with this thing. Or you can even be a little bit specific. 7 students in this class have an IEP, and 3 of them specifically for auditory processing disorder, right? So you know that you have those kids in there. Yes, it's the whole class, but 7 of them have this thing. And then you're going to tell, I collected what? I collected surveys from parents, which showed me that 70% of my students are involved in after school activities, right? That could matter. So then you don't talk about homework because your kids struggle with that, however you want to do that. But for number 1, I recommend that you're going to take up about a page and a half on question 1 alone, because it says the information, and I think I ended up having 9 sources of information that I talked about, and there was a lot of information about my kids. Okay. For question number 2, remember when I asked you to think about adjectives, I want you to start thinking about the adjectives for this group of students based on all of the information that you gathered. And you might say things like, this group benefits from differentiated instruction. That seems like a blanket term, but you could go into it and dig a little bit deeper into what that means, okay? Or you may have a group that benefits from group work, small group instruction. They benefit from frequent breaks, whatever they are. Think about your adjectives. I had a group that was extremely talkative. When I tell you they would talk to the wall, they would talk to the wall. So I knew that I had to have timers and I had to have things to keep them invested in the middle of the lesson, or they were going to phase out and they were going to talk to other people. So when I talked about them being talkative, I said what I was going to do for them. Okay. You're going to design assessments for these kids based on the information in this form. So this form is your tablecloth for your Thanksgiving meal, okay? It's in the background. It's there all the time. It's making everything pretty, and everything that you have should be based on this form. If it's in this form, be prepared to talk about it in your written commentary. Be prepared to mention it when you're designing your assessments. Does anyone have any questions for knowledge of students or ways that you might represent it, or questions about this part or the form?
So we have one in the chat, and then I'll see if we've got any others. And I've sort of addressed it, but want your expertise. So Tiffany is doing CTE. She teaches a career prep course. And so she wondered if a career aptitude assessment would be acceptable for her knowledge of students. I told her, I'm like, collect every piece of information you can. So administering something like that seems like it could be really relevant and valuable. You may find that you end up not using that. It may not be the most relevant data. But my recommendation would be to administer it. But Beth, I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Yes, I actually ended up administering surveys to students, surveys to their parents, and I didn't use the parent surveys. I ended up going with the student surveys because I felt that what I learned about 11th grade students was more accurate coming from them than it was coming from their parents. But a career aptitude test in CTE, yes, go for it. Keep that information, because you may find that 50% of your students want to do something that's a hands-on type of work. And then when you design your assessment, you think to yourself, oh, wait a minute, 50% of my students said that they really liked doing something that was hands-on. So I differentiated my assessment and I gave them a project option or a paper option. And that source of data is a valid point when you're doing anything like that. There's no limit to the amount of data you should collect. What you end up showing maybe a lot less. I'm sure that I had way more than 9 sources of data, but I chose the 9 sources of data to share with my assessor that ended up having the greatest impact on my students.
The only other question that's in the chat right now is just slides being shared. And yes, the recording and slides will be shared with you guys. So don't worry about that. Okay, we've got another question for library media.
Okay.
Could I use checkout records, Beanstack, which is their logged reading app, so data from that as a part of this section?
Yeah, I would say so, because that could show you trends and patterns on the genres that they're choosing, how often that student comes in and reads, if they're struggling with things. And so, yes, that could definitely be a part of your data. If you design your assessments based on that, yeah, that'd be great. I'm always on the side of collect the data, always collect the data, and then decide later what ended up being the most useful to you. Because I mean, I had other tests that I didn't even talk about. There were lots of things that I'd never mentioned.
And I think, Beth, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like there's, whether it's a form or it's in the written commentary, they're like, what data did you collect that was not relevant? Like they kind of are like, what sources did you not use? So the more you have, the better.
Yes, actually, I want to look at that, because it does say something along the lines of, when it asks you in the written commentary, and if you guys can see, I want to encourage you to be the person who writes. This is literally my binder. I don't know if you can see it. You might not be able to see it. This is the one that I went through when I went through with Amber. Like I said again, I just love her, and I wrote everything down. And one of the questions that I thought that it was interesting, it says, what other factors did you take into account when analyzing and reflecting on the various sources of information, and why? So this question to me is making me say, which source was the most important? Why did you choose this source? I mean, like I said, I spoke to parents and I spoke to students. I ultimately didn't end up using the parent data. And I said that I made that choice to use student data. I also mentioned when I spoke to former teachers that I was careful not to consider too heavily negative information that I received about my students, because I didn't want to shade my own personal views. Like the student that I ended up being the whisperer for the student. He loved me, but his previous teacher had really struggled with him and had given me a pretty stern warning about him, that he was going to be a struggle for me. He wasn't. He loved me and I loved him, and I was the whisperer for that student. So just think about why you chose that information, because we don't use everything we get.
I see one more question, and I think we'll be good. So Miss Fanning, who I believe is CTE, she has a piggybacked class. So it's 3 different courses of ed and training, but they're in one classroom. So she's asking, do you include all 3 groups' data, or just pick one course roster in that class?
Ooh, so there are 3 different rosters, but they're all in the same classroom, or there's three different sections of kids, but they're all on the same roster.
You want to unmute again, Miss Fanning, and kind of explain your situation for us?
Yeah. I can see them on all one roster, but one of them, one class is like, say there's 13 students in my second level, which is called Practices in Education, and my third level is Methods in Education, which is totally different course standards. It's a different course. There's three different courses, and because of the numbers, they put all of them in one. I only have one in the third level, no, two in the third level. So I have 13 on one, 5 in another, and 2 in another. And so they're all in the same classroom, but I have to teach them different content.
I would defer to the teach to the 1-800, is it 888 or 800-22-TEACH? But if they're on different rosters and they're all receiving different content, I'd be nervous about putting them together, but I can't 100% for sure answer that. I would try to find a CTE person in your area, and then I would also defer to National Board to double check.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so we're going to go to the next part here, which is assessment. And this is the part that ends up really bogging down a lot of people, and they get nervous about this one after they do their knowledge of students, okay? Here's an overview for what you're going to do for the assessment section of your Component 4 portfolio. You're going to design one formative assessment, one summative, and one student self-assessment. And it's going to be directly tied to your unit goals, okay? I know that there are some prohibitions on overlap between Component 2, Component 3, and Component 4. So double check your standards and your directions. I believe that you may be able to do videos on parts of your lessons, but they need to be different units. Just double check that. I personally did different preps and different classes so that I didn't have those issues, and did different units for everything just because I wanted to show a breadth of my knowledge. But just make sure that you double check that. Now, when you're thinking about designing assessments, it needs to be absolutely obvious that your assessments were designed with your students in mind. This means you're working to meet their needs. So some of the questions: why this format? Why did you give it now? Why didn't you do it this way? Why did you ask this question? Why? And you're going to drive yourself crazy thinking, well, I mean, I always give this test when I do Gatsby. That's why I did it. No, it's not. It's not the same test you always give. You did something different with these kids because you know them, right? It could be, a whole bunch of different things. I won't get all into all of it, but we're going to move forward on that in a minute. Now, I want you to go in and read your assessment standard extremely carefully, okay? Your assessment standard for your certificate area is going to tell you what beautiful assessments look like in your content. My assessment standard tells me what great English language arts teachers do when they assess their students. Read that standard and start to mark up things that you're already successfully doing. Maybe if you're successfully doing it, you want to highlight it green for go. If you're a little bit nervous about it, you want to highlight it yellow. Well, I would like to do this, or I'm doing this, but maybe I'm not that great at it. And then if it's something that you haven't seen or heard of, maybe you highlight it pink and you go back and you try it later. So I want you to be comfortable with your assessment standard, all of your standards. But for this one, dive deep into that assessment standard, first of all. Okay. Secondly, your assessments can be teacher made or they could be pre-made. Here's my advice. Why would you use a pre-made copyrighted assessment that you can only describe? Because then you can't share pictures of it. It's not your assessment, right? You use that because it's part of your curriculum or whatever else. Create your own assessment. Even if it's based on a different assessment, create it so that you can share pictures of your assessment. I can promise you that your assessor does not care what your formatting looks like. You can make the ugliest little Word document that you want to and have your kids write all over it. You can hand write your assessment and have your kids work on it. It does not matter. Make your assessment so that you can share beautiful pictures of it. Okay? All right. Formative assessments are for some of your unit standards. You may be assessing let's say this. When I'm thinking about English language arts, I sometimes for a unit will have 10 different standards that I'm working on, right? Because English language arts is very cyclical. That means I'm working back through that content over and over again. Where in math, it's linear. If my students don't know this, they can't move on to the next thing. But in English, they can. They can keep moving on, and then we just keep going back over and over again. So formative assessments assess some of your unit standards. So if you have 7 unit standards, your formative assessment should not assess all of them. It only assesses some of them. And a pretest might not be your best bet for a formative assessment, because my question for people who are like, well, I gave a pretest. Okay, but where are you in the pretest? If you give the pretest, it shows you where your students are so you know where to begin instruction. But formative assessment comes in the middle of instruction, where I'm going to give a little assessment here to see if my kids got what I taught them. And then I'm going to move on, or I'm going to reteach, I'm going to reassess, I'm going to have to do whatever I have to do. And this is a really big hot take, especially for admins, when I tell them formative assessments are not graded. Okay, because they want me to put formative assessments in the grade book. We'll make it a lower stakes assessment. I don't like grading formative assessments. My babies are learning. That's why it's formative. Formative assessments aren't graded, but you ultimately use the data, right? Your kids aren't doing well on this. They're not doing well on this. All right. Your summative assessments assess all of unit standards. So that means when you share your form that goes in and says, these are my unit goals, you're going to assess every single one of them with your summative assessment, okay? The formative assessment and your student self-assessments will show how you changed your instruction based on your data gathered during the progress of the unit. You don't want to assess your students and say 25% of my students struggled with this. I moved on. No, if they're struggling with it, you're going to stop what you're doing. You're going to do small group small group instruction or whatever you need to do. All right. Now, for evidence, there's a couple of different things here that you should do for your evidence. You're going to have 2 pages to show the actual assessment, okay? The test or the assessment or the activity that you did with your students. If it's a single page for your formative assessment, choose 2 grade examples that mirror the trends, the patterns, and the outliers that you're going to show ultimately in your data. But if your assessment is multiple pages, pick examples from multiple students that show different parts of the assessment. So you may have a 2-page test, right? And then you have student A and student B, and student A is showing one of the struggles, student B is showing one of the major wins of your data, whatever it is that you want to do. But you want to make sure that you're going to show it. You can use a blank assessment, but it's not going to give you anything beautiful to talk about except for the way that you design the assessment. I'm always an evidence girl. Make sure that everything that you have is filled out by students. I also only allowed my students to write in blue and black ink during this entire process, and used a different color pen, and that was what I wrote all over their stuff with, so that it was very obvious where my notes were and where their notes were. If you teach elementary school kids, that's not going to be an issue, but sometimes high school kids have good handwriting that looks a lot like mine. All right, data from your assessment. You're going to have 2 pages for your data from each assessment. So 2 pages of data for your formative and 2 pages of data for your summative assessment, okay? Don't recreate the wheel here. Don't think of anything crazy. Create a form, share some anecdotal data, screenshot charts and graphs showing trends, patterns, and outliers. Go into Google Docs and create pie charts, or if it's in Google Sheets or whatever you have, other ways to caption your data. But this is going to show data for the entire class. The assessments are going to show samples from specific students, but your data that you have for 2 pages is going to show the entire class. Okay? Then for your self-assessment, the student self-assessment, you're going to do 3 examples, and it says label them student A, B, and C, and you're going to have 3 pages, and you're going to show examples of 3 students' self-assessment. Sky's the limit on self-assessment here. One of Amber's tricks was that a self-assessment does not leave your kids wondering what's going to be on their summative assessment, right? It gives you a little snapshot. Maybe it looks similar in format, or it has some of those questions. Whatever it does, it allows students to stop what they're doing and assess themselves. And it also provides you with necessary data. Okay. All right, let's take a look at our forms. The first.
Hey, Beth, can I stop you before we move into the forms? There are a couple of questions I just don't want us to miss around the data collection piece. So
Sure.
Irene was asking, could you just kind of elaborate on the self-assessment piece? and just offer some more context there, perhaps?
Sure. I've seen lots of different examples for student self-assessment. For my students, we were working on a literary analysis unit, and I knew that my final assessment was going to end up being a one-pager with a written component to it, right? So I began to think for the student self-assessment, I wanted to know if the students were going to be able to demonstrate some of the skills that I needed them to show later. So when I designed my student self-assessment, I did make the self-assessment take up a whole page, right? Because I knew that I got 3 pages and I didn't want to have any issues with shrinking it. And then I asked my students some very specific questions about the text that we had read. And it may have had 2 or 3 different questions on it, just so that I could see if they were getting part of it. And then for their self-assessment, I literally asked them, are you anticipating any struggles? What questions do you have? Where do you feel comfortable? What are you worried about? And I used the information. Like, I had students who were literally telling me, Miss Russell, I know that you've told me what a symbol is, but I still feel like I don't understand this. And then I used their self-assessments to set them up for small group instruction before their summative assessment. I've seen lots of other things. It can be rating scales. If you have elementary school students, you can do smiley faces and sad faces. The student rates themselves. How comfortable do you feel adding even numbers? And a student might put a sad face. And so you think to yourself, okay, am I going to do small group instruction here? Am I going to, what am I going to do for my kids? Students need to assess themselves, and sometimes they may assess themselves higher than they actually are. And so you can say, I see little Jimmy over here is assessing himself as a green super smiley face, but he scored a 20 on his formative assessment. So I got some cognitive dissonance between Jimmy knowing what he knows and what he thinks he knows. So don't overthink that self-assessment. Like, how do you ask students? Maybe you create a poll online and you poll them, or you have the students fill out a form, whatever you want to do. You're just going to show 3 different students examples of their use of whatever you designed. It won't be for the whole class. It'll be 3 individual students.
Irene, hopefully that's helpful. If there's a more specific question, drop that in the chat. I will say, as a kindergarten person, I ended up doing a traffic light for my kids, but I submitted transcripts of my conversation with them.
Yes.
Because I thought that was more impactful than them just circling the green light. And so I had a previous student come in and model a green light response, because I felt like that was important for them to know, like, this is an exemplar. So when you're assessing yourself, like, did you say as much as Cassidy, or were you able to do this as well as this model was? So I called them back and had individual conversations and just recorded them on voice memos, and then did the painstaking work of transcribing. Now, there's probably better technology now to help you transcribe, but transcribe the portion of the conversation that I had with the child. So that's what it can look like with little people.
Yes.
Miss Fanning was asking, could you use a Kahoot or a Quizlet Live for your formative assessment and use the export data for that?
For the formative, I mean, yeah, you could do something like that. I would say as long as you can show, that would be good. Yes. And I want to mirror what Rachel is saying about the transcriptions. If you ever have something like, for example, in one part of my C3, I had a picture of something that I had done with the students, but I didn't feel like the picture was going to show. And so I literally wrote over to the side. I made a note about something that I asked the student when I looked at it. And so that little piece of evidence was there over to the side. It was not, shrunken down or anything. It was just in regular script on there. But yes, use transcriptions if you need to add more information, especially for little students.
Mm-hmm. I think Irene asked a clarifying question, like, do you have to record the conversations or just take notes? Even if you are taking notes, recording them was so helpful for me, whether you actually do a transcript or not. But you are going to need to either have the evidence, the actual assessment itself, or a transcript. You've got to have one of those two.
Right.
So
yeah, and you can do You don't actually have to record it. Like I'm a note person where I just make notes in the middle of things. As soon as I'm talking to my students, I make notes and they make notes. But if that transcription, if you have a million things going on, you can always refer back to that, or when you're videoing different things that could be really helpful for you.
Okay, I think those are, sorry I interrupted. I didn't want us to get too far away from that
Awesome.
before you got into the form. So I think we're good to go.
Okay, so here's the first form that you're going to do is your instructional context form. And you'll notice up there in your gray box, it says that you're going to get one single spaced page in Arial 11-point font. So for question number 1, it says describe the unit, use short sentences and make it quick. Don't narrate, don't take up a half a page on this and tell everything that you're going to do in the unit. Just give a quick overview. This unit is for adding positive and negative integers. This unit is for blending vowels and consonants. This unit is for literary analysis on the Book of Mice and Men. Whatever it is, make it a couple of quick short sentences. Overall, they're going to learn a lot about your unit, but they just need you to tell. Now, for number 2, list specific learning targets. This can be standards, or it can be goals that you set for your students. I want to reiterate that because I will see so many people put their state standard language here, and that's fine if that's what you want to do, but that is not all that you are limited to, okay? One of my goals for my students was that they used talk stems to respond appropriately to their peers. That is not a state standard for the 11th graders, but I can promise you that they needed to use those talk stems, and I did that as part of my C3 because I was having problems with students going, that is not even what he said, and then they would get in and get started on each other, or they would go, you know what I mean, over and over again. And so I had a goal for my students to use positive academic language, right? So describing your unit objectives, I do recommend that you number them and that you do them as U1, U2, U3, U4, so on and so forth, so that later when you're writing your written commentary, instead of saying 27% of my students struggle with adding integers that are negative and positive, you could say 20% of students struggled with U1, period. We love a short sentence and commentary. It just makes our hearts sing, okay? So if you number them as U1, U2, and U3, you can help use those later on. For number 3, and you're going to see that I've done this a lot of times on these forms, I have circled that word and. Because it took me getting through, I can't tell you how many forms. I'm not even ashamed to admit it because I want to share this failure with you. When I first wrote C2, I had to go through 7 edits with my mentor before I had anything that was close to something that an assessor would want to read. I would send something through to my mentor. Her name is Amy Box. She is an amazing woman and I love her. But let me tell you, she deserved a gold medal for reading what I was sending her because I was missing words like and or. Those are 2 different words. If it says and, you do everything. If it says or, you can make some choices. But I was answering questions it wasn't asking. I was adding additional information when I didn't need to. And through 7 drafts of C2 and crying and crying and crying, I ended up getting a no feedback score on C2. And it was because it was little things like the word and that for some reason I wasn't paying attention to. So when you see the word and, it says describe why the selected assessments are appropriate for your students and the unit objectives. So yes, you're going to tell me why it's appropriate for your students, but if you leave out why the assessment is also appropriate for your unit objectives, you're missing part of the question, and all of that little stuff like that plays into your rubric score. So if you see the word and, circle it and tell yourself, why is it appropriate for the students and the assessment? And you're going to use sentence stems. If you haven't heard of Bobby Faulkner, if you haven't heard of her amazing books and her sentence stems, I will give you information about her at the end of the presentation. Get her books. They are lifesavers, okay? And they have sentence stems like, I chose blank because. I chose a multiple choice assessment because, right? I chose open-ended sentences because. I chose to give this assessment at the beginning of class because I did this, or I used this by doing this. I designed this assessment to do what? Tell me on this form why your selected assessments are appropriate for the students, and the objectives. Don't go too crazy here because you're going to get some other forms that are going to tell exactly why your summative assessment and your formative assessment are designed the way that they are. But think about the unit objectives overall. This is what you're assessing. Why are these assessments the best bet? Okay. All right. Let's take a look at our next form, the formative assessment materials form. So we're going to see here that this form, it says no more than 2 single-spaced pages, and then you're going to attach the assessment, 2 pages of the assessment, 2 pages of the data, and 3 pages of the self-assessment. I'll talk a little bit about PDF merging later at the end of the session if that starts to confuse you and you start to think, what do you mean add things together? I can talk to you more about that, and I know that mentors will be glad to help you with that part of it. So you have 2 different questions here, and I want you to take a look at the way that this question, it's got an and there, but look at everything that it asks you in the single question. It says describe the assessment, including the purpose, appropriate use, student population, how the assessment was developed, how it was administered, how were the results scored and evaluated, how the results are intended to be used. So what I did when I answered this question, and I did things like this often to help keep myself honest, as I answered the questions, when I ran across the word purpose, I bolded it. The purpose of this assessment was to do this. I developed this assessment by doing this. When I scored this assessment, I did this. And I just bolded each one of the words from the question to show that I answered it because I was so worried that I was going to skip something because I had done it so many times. Based on the amount of information that you're providing, that question should probably take up the bulk of the form. I spent about 1.5 pages on question number 1 alone. That's a long question to answer for the formative assessment, okay? And then question number 2 is going to say, provide context for the examples of the student self-assessments. When you think about context, I want you to think about, why did you choose to show the students that you chose? What goals were they mastering? What were they struggling with? Why would you show Johnny and not Mary? Why'd you show those kids? So think about who they are, why you gave them this self-assessment, what the scorer is going to look at when they see your examples. A good student self-assessment is a good checkpoint for your kids to help them avoid surprises and provide valuable information about their progress. Okay? So you're going to put all that stuff together. The formative assessment packs a lot. It's got a lot going on there. 9 pages alone for your formative assessment. She's a beast. Okay? Finally, let's take a look at our summative assessment materials form. You're going to see the exact same question that you saw on your formative assessment form, but they trick you a little bit here. They say you can get 1 page. So now you're going to answer each part of the question the same way that you did for your formative assessment. But you're going to have to be a little bit more succinct here, okay? And what I recommend was, if you start getting bogged down with these words, which you can, if I describe the assessment, aren't I telling you what is the purpose and the appropriate use of the assessment? Because I have people look at me and they go, I don't know, the purpose of the assessment was to see if the kids learn what they were supposed to learn. And what do you mean the appropriate use of the assessment? I used it in my class, that's appropriate. Use the Control F on the PDF copy of your standards, okay? If you've never heard of that trick, most of us have, but every now and then we have people that don't know. If you pull up a PDF and you do a Control or a Command, if you're on a Mac, Command F, and you go through, you can search your standards for those words. So go to your assessment standard. What does it mean, appropriate use? What's National Board want me to talk about? Because you know a lot of things, but you may not know it in National Board lingo, okay? So go through Control F your standards. If you have questions, it'll help you answer the prompts here, okay? Does anybody have any questions about the assessment section? I know that there's a lot of information there.
Gina asked, and I answered in the chat, when you're talking about the form and it says, like, is this where we should include the assessments that are filled out by our students? Yes, like when they say, show me the assessment, give them a completed copy of the assessment, correct, Beth? Yeah.
Yes. And what I do want to say here is that, and this will be what you ultimately end up worrying about in like April, when you start to get everything ready to start to format it. What I would recommend that you do is that you create your forms, and I'll talk about this later. I personally preferred Microsoft Word. And I would go in and I would type on my form, and I would just keep that copy either in Word or in Docs or whatever else. And then when I knew my form was done, I would click to print it as a PDF and I would save it. And then I used Google Drive and I saved everything in very specific folders. And then for my student assessments, you can scan them in. You can use, I have an app called Genius Scan. It's like a scanner on my phone. I think you can scan into the iPhone Notes app. You can scan things a whole bunch of different ways. And then I either, I would like click print to do my PDFs. And so I had a whole bunch of different little PDFs living in my Google Drive. And then I didn't worry about anything being done. Just don't type everything into the form. Like I've seen people that get the form and they just keep inserting information into the form. And then you have the national board logo at the bottom of your stuff. Don't do it that way. Just create a whole bunch of different PDFs. And then when you get later and you're ready to, you can just click to merge everything online and you'll be like, I want to merge this file, this file, this file, because ultimately I had the form, formative assessment, data, and then I had 3 different student self-assessments. So I think I had like 6 files that I put together to make this one little file. And that's something that your people will be able to help you with. I don't want you to freak out about that until April, but just create your PDFs. And as long as everything is in PDF form, you'll be fine. You can merge everything later. Don't worry about it.
And then Stacy wants you to revisit your Control F function to pull the standards in a PDF. She had not heard of that trick.
Yes, it's awesome. So you can even do it on MacBooks, you can do it on Windows, and you can also do it on Chromebooks because our students have Chromebooks. For me, I just click Command F on my Mac if you're in a PDF, and it'll pull up a little search feature, and the little magnifying glass will be up there, and you can put in the word administered. You can put in the word, whatever word that you're going to be looking for, and it will highlight it. And there should be an option to toggle through the different instances of the word in your PDF. So if you ever see a question where you're looking at National Board and you're thinking, I don't know what you mean by appropriate use, Control F, what is appropriate use, and you're just going to search for that one word and it'll pop up and it'll let you know what you're looking for. And you can do that with any PDF that exists. Even this one. So later on, if you get a PDF copy of this presentation and you're going, what did she say about that? Control F, and you'll be able to find it quickly. And you can do that too if your students read PDF copies of books and they'll be telling me, Miss Russell, what page was it on when Gatsby said this? Well, I don't know. Which word are you thinking about? And they Control F the one word and they can find the quote really quickly. So that's awesome.
All right. I think those are definitely all the questions in the chat. So we can press on.
All right. So next up, now you've been working with the same class this whole time, right? You've been working on your knowledge of students. You've been working on your assessment data. And now you're going to get to the third part of this portfolio, which is your professional learning need. You do not have to use the same set of kids for your professional learning need. It can be the exact same class. I used my 8th period for my portfolio for the knowledge of students and for the assessment, but I did something completely different for my professional learning needs. These were completely different kids. So I want you to think about this. Out of all of the professional development and learning opportunities that you engage in, and you do a lot of them, what can you share with your assessors to show how you personally consider the needs of your students, the need of your school, and or your own professional practice? Okay, so here are some tips that you can think about when you start thinking about your professional learning need. It can be connected to the class that you've chosen for your knowledge of students or your KOS and your assessment, but it doesn't have to be the same class. You can think about different things such as technology needs, professional learning needs, reading strategies, math strategies, PLCs, grading techniques, assessment practices. As long as it's connected to student learning, go for it. Personally, I was teaching AP Lang for the first time the year that I went through national boards. And I was very comfortable with AP Lit. I had the highest certification rate in the county for AP Lit. But when I started teaching AP Lang, it was like a slap in the face to everything that I thought that I knew. And so I sought out mentoring through advanced placement. And I went through a mentoring cohort online for 3 or 4 different months. And I learned an amazing strategy. It was a very simple strategy to other people that they had thought of it, but I had some notes that I had taken during that, and I implemented the strategy in the class, and then I showed that my students increased their scores 40% or something like that after I'd implemented a single strategy. So I had something that I needed to be a better Miss Russell for my kids. And so I sought out mentoring for it. And that was it. That was my professional learning need. It can be for you by yourself, or it can be for your colleagues. I can't tell you how many of the elementary people for MC Gen and EC Gen, which are middle and early childhood generalists, that they love the letters training. Letters training has been mind-blowing for these teachers, teaching these students how to read and how to decode. And so a lot of them have sought out letters training, and they've talked about that. Maybe they've talked about all different kinds of trainings. It can even be emotional needs. Maybe your kids have some sort of emotional regulation and you do some sort of strategy and it helps students do better. They learn better because of it. Okay. You want it to be based on your knowledge of your students and assessment practices. Okay. It does not have to be related to the upcoming student need. We're going to talk about the student need in a minute. And as a matter of fact, if your professional need and your student need are related, your data and your evidence might start to overlap a little bit, and it might limit what you can really talk about. So I want to really stop for a second and think about this professional learning need, because ultimately I and other mentors are going to get this question. Do you think this would work? Do you think this would work? Have you thought about this? Before I even go into different types of evidence that you can discuss, I want to stop for a second and maybe drop into the chat or unmute yourself some sorts of professional developments or opportunities, because the window for your professional learning need is 24 months, not 12 months, so that it could even be something that maybe you did this summer. What kind of professional developments or experiences have you engaged in that you have taken into your class or could take into your classroom? So we can drop those in the chat or just unmute. And I don't have the chat pulled up, Rachel. If you could read those out for me so I can.
Yeah, so I had just put in the chat. So I did standards-based grading. That was what I focused on. Somebody had said letters. I see IMSE. I don't know what that is, but
I had a math friend who talked about what is it called where they do this designing thinking classrooms, building thinking classrooms. They did the building thinking classrooms in math and they talked about it. And that was
yeah.
great.
I'm seeing modern classroom strategies, ACT math workshop. One of the things I'll say about this, building thinking classrooms, standards-based grading letters, or Gillingham, ACT mastery, reading, writing, English. One of the things that we have to remind people a lot is that, like, this is a tool that's not in your tool belt yet. So this is not you meeting someone else's need or you meeting a student need. We'll get to that later. This is you going and getting a tool to make you better, to meet the needs of your students. And so, like, if you're an instructional coach, a lot of times people are like, oh, well, I'm going to turn around this PD. No. This is still, even though in your capacity you are a coach, what professional learning are you personally doing? I'm seeing differentiation. That's great.
Yes. And so when you think about it, like, for example, if you go through letters training, yes, your district may ask you to go through this training, but why did you say, yes, this is the need that I see for my kids? Like when I talked about the data that I collected, my students were nervous. They were not comfortable with writing their thesis statements, and they were starting to just jam up in the middle of their writing. And so I thought to myself, this is a me issue. When all of my students or most of my students are struggling with something, it's a me issue. So I had to stop for a second and say, what do I need to do? Because AP Lang training was not enough. I am not good enough at this. I want you to think to yourself, what am I doing to make myself better to meet this need that my kids have? My kids, yes, they increased their learning because their scores went up after I did it, but they also increased their confidence, right? And that made a difference for my kids, okay? So let's start to look at some evidence examples. Meeting notes. Okay, when you attend all of these professional developments, like Rachel says, when you start to equip your tool belt, okay, you start to make your toolbox. And I love to think about that. I tell my students about the toolbox analogy all the time. I'm like, guys, you've got a whole toolbox over here for writers. Why do you keep grabbing the same pen? Get a different pen. Think about notes that you take when you attend PD. You can use that information later. I get all kinds of great information this way, okay? You can use informal or formal notes from meetings or PD sessions. You're going to have to show the evidence of whatever strategy and its effect on student learning. So you want to think about how to maybe show a strategy in action, something that you've learned. You can give surveys to staff or other students. You can use one as evidence of determining a need, showing how you met the need, right? You can do book studies. Maybe you've been working through a text with some of your colleagues. Maybe your PLC has been doing something, or maybe you've started a PLC, or you've learned this amazing new strategy and you want to turn it around and help other teachers learn this strategy because it made a difference for you. Show those things. Now, I will see ultimately when we start getting things ready in March and April, people will come to me and they'll go, I have this certificate where I attended training. All right, that shows me that you attended training, and that's great. Does it show me how you met the need? No. So I want you to think outside of a certificate, because the certificate shows attendance. Your notes show what you learned. Surveys show what you learned. Book study notes show what you learned. Think outside of the box. What did you learn and how did you implement it? Okay, you're going to have 2 pages of evidence here. You're going to show how you met the need. For me personally, I showed notes that I took, then my impact on student learning. I took the strategy. I showed that a student successfully used the strategy in an essay, and then I captioned the data. This is what they were doing before, and this is what they were doing after my implementation of one single strategy that I learned during AP mentoring. And I sought out the AP mentoring. No one beat me over the head and made me go to AP mentoring 3 hours a month, on my Tuesday nights. No one made me do it, but I'm glad that I did it because it made a difference for my kids. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at the professional learning need form. You're going to see here again in your gray box, you get one single spaced page in Arial 11-point font. And then it says that you get evidence, and it says no more than 2 pages combined. For your evidence, you're going to show evidence of how you met the professional learning need. And then you're going to show evidence of your impact on student learning. Okay? On student learning. Student emotional outcomes is not student learning. Your outcomes is not student learning. How did your students learn better because of what you did? So for question number 1, you're going to tell how you knew the need exists. And that could be with data. My data showed a before and after I implemented the strategy, so that kind of showed that the need was there, but there are other ways that you can find out that you have a professional learning need. It could be a come to Jesus moment, right? All of your assessment data is trending in this problem. You've spoken to your colleagues and you've all expressed an interest in this thing. Whatever it is, how did you know that you met the need, right? And how did you meet that need? Then for number 2, you're going to describe each piece of evidence that you're attaching, showing how you met the need and the effect on student learning. Don't make your assessor guess at what you're uploading there. Be explicit with what you have. Okay, so for me, I was like, this is the strategy that I learned. I included a piece of evidence from a student's essay where they successfully used the strategy. And then I captioned the evidence showing a 50% increase in student writing scores immediately after implementation of the strategy. I told exactly what I was showing to my assessor. Does anyone have any questions about the professional learning need?
So I was typing an answer to this one about my own experience, but Megan asked a great question. Like, what if your district says no because there's no money? Like, if I wanted to do Orton Gillingham, but like I can't, there's no funding for that. So I told y'all I did standards-based grading, but I could not get dollars to go to PD. So I asked a couple of teacher besties, colleagues to do a book study with me. And so we all went and just got a book. We met a couple times. We watched videos by Thomas Gusky and John Hattie, just watched some videos together and learned together, and just kind of made our own little book study PLC PD group ourselves. So that's very much a reality. If anybody has thoughts, or Beth, if you have some insight on that, but you may not get to go and do the great grand PD that you'd like to meet your PLN. So
Yeah, and there's also, I know for me, if you have any other, if there's anyone who's ever interested in any sort of things for AP mentoring, I qualified for a scholarship for AP mentoring. I had to really go out of my way to apply for that scholarship. But sometimes, like you said, there's not money for things. My best friend and I were colleagues, and we were trying to figure out a way. I really probably talking about it in my MOC when I go to start about that. We were trying to figure out a way to make ACT writing fit in with our regular argumentative writing, because I have no problem talking about ACT with my students, but I am dead set against test prep in my classroom. I mainstream and I streamline test prep into my content, and I refuse to do anything differently. So I'm not teaching ACT writing and argumentative writing. And so my best friend and I went through this thing all school year last year where we were trying desperately to figure out a way to make it fit. And we eked out some time. We were able to get our principal to give us 2 PD days to work together. Like, we were still on site, but we worked together on this. And we came up with this way to streamline it in through a system that we created. And we actually had a 200% increase in our ACT writing scores after we implemented what we designed. But we really had to stop what we were doing personally. It didn't cost us a penny to do it. It just took our time. And that's something that would be valid to talk about. Like, if I were doing a professional learning need right now, I would talk about that writing in a heartbeat, a way to meet the need of students to do that, but also not to just teach them this whole separate thing. So think outside the box. PD doesn't have to cost money. We want.
And Megan, I just saw, oh, sorry, Beth. Megan, I saw that you mentioned too, like even just within district provided PD, which Beth kind of alluded to this with letters training, but like, yeah, like if your district is already providing something to you and you can justify and see how it meets your student needs, then that absolutely can be your PLN. Like, letters was paid for by the state and I was made to do it, but 100% it met the needs of my students. It would have been super easy for me to justify that. So if your district is sending you to something, just be intentional about, like, okay, how does this specifically address the knowledge of students that I've collected? How does this serve my kids? And something like that could easily check this box for you.
I had an instructional coach 2 years ago who read the quality questioning handbook, and she was just in love with quality questioning, and she shared it with us at our beginning of the school year PD. And I just thought to myself, you know what, that's actually a really interesting idea. And I purchased the book for myself, and I went through and I implemented some of those strategies in my classroom. I could have used that for a professional learning need. I mean, she brought the idea to me. It wasn't something that I sought out, but it did answer some of the problems and fix some of the issues that I was having in my personal classroom. And it just cost me like $20 to get the book. And sometimes those books are available for free.
Yeah, we see quality questioning a lot, and that's it shows up a lot as a PLN. So
yeah, so if anyone's not heard of quality questioning, have at it. That one's an awesome one for
mm-hmm.
professional learning need.
All right, I think that's all that's in the chat for PLN. So I think we're good.
Awesome. Let's hit up on our student need. I think this one was really confusing to me at first, and I really didn't know what I was going to do for my student need. And then I feel like God answered my prayers, and a student dropped something amazing into my lap that I'll share with you guys in a second. Okay. So how do you collaborate with others to advocate for your students? So you're talked about a professional learning need. What do you have for yourself to help your students learn better and to make you a better teacher? And now you're going to think about what you do to collaborate with others just for your kids, okay? So again, this can be connected to the class that you've chosen for your knowledge of students and your assessment, but it does not have to be the same class. It doesn't even have to be connected to your professional learning need. Mine wasn't. This can be academic needs for your students. This can be emotional needs, other larger community-based needs, such as at your school, at your entire district, in your community, or even a professional association. And again, I'm going to reiterate this. It does not have to be related to your professional learning need. It can be, but it does not have to be at all. Okay, it can limit the impact and the evidence that you show if they are related, as a matter of fact. The only thing that you have to think about here is that you have to show evidence of collaboration with others. For the professional learning need, this was all about you. You are the star. But for the student need, you're going to show, yes, I did this, but I also collaborated with other people to meet this need and to provide advocacy for my students. Okay. So different types of evidence here. There's not going to be a standard answer. There's no black and white answer here, but I wanted you to think about, how did you consider that you knew the need exists? I had a student come up to me out of nowhere in January, and she said, Miss Russell, you know, we don't have a Black History Month program here at Lincoln. Do you think that was something that we could get started? And it was just like light bulbs went off in my brain. And I was like, yes, that is something that we can get started. That student saw a need. She felt that there wasn't any representation there. So I worked with her. I worked with my instructional coach and with some of the admins, and we did all different kinds of things. We added posters up in the hallway. We added stuff to the morning announcements. We added stuff to the TVs in the hallway, and we did all these things for Black History Month. And that was a need that that student had. It was a single student who approached me and said, we don't have this. Got it. And we still do it every year because of that one student. So I want you to think about different things that you can do. Does the data show a need? Did a student mention it to you? Did a colleague mention this need to you? Are you seeing some students coming in every morning who are forgetting their lunch money? They don't have lunch. They're coming in cold. They are some outcast kids who are doing this, or the kids who are always busy with academics and with their sports and everything. They're struggling in their academics. What's the need for these kids? What do they need? You can give meeting notes, email chains, teacher student impact statements, other documents from stakeholders, whatever you determine your need is. I had a student write an impact statement, and I had a teacher write an impact statement for me of what it meant for them to see. If you ask people for help, they are going to help you. No one is going to say no. I literally said, after that student said, can you tell me how that helped you when we did this program? And I had a teacher come up to me, and she was like, I didn't know this, this, or this, but I actually included that in my lesson. I said, hey, will you write me a letter about that? That would be amazing evidence for me that I worked with someone else. Okay. So the trick here is that you do have to have 3 pieces of evidence, but they're only going to give you 2 pages for this evidence. So you're going to have to think about your formatting here. You're going to provide first evidence of the need. You're going to show evidence of the impact, and you're going to show evidence of the impact of the collaboration. So you got to show evidence that you collaborated with other people, and that you had need, and that you had an impact. And again, here I said that you're going to consider your formatting. Be sure to read your instructions on sizing your evidence. My trick for sizing evidence was that if I printed it off, I could read it, hold it away from myself without any form of magnification. If I had to zoom in on the screen, or I had to hold it closely to be able to read something, it was a no-go for me. And your assessors will not read anything over their page limit. If something has been made smaller, they won't read it. So make sure that you pay attention to your evidence. And we're going to take a look at that form real quick. Okay. The description of a student need form is going to be 1 page for your form, 1 page single-spaced type. And then you're going to have 2 pieces of evidence that you merge in later when you merge all your PDFs together. So number 1, it says describe a student need that required advocacy, collaboration, and notice here we have and or leadership on your part. So you do not have to mention advocacy, collaboration, and leadership. I didn't take a leadership position with mine, but I did advocate for my students, and I collaborated with others. So if you and or there, that's fine. It could be on your part within a larger learning community. So you're going to tell how you knew the need existed and what did you do. Then for number 2, you're going to describe the evidence that you're attaching. So number 1 might be a little bit longer here, where you tell what the need is and how you met that need. But number 2 is going to be, I've attached meeting notes from my student council. I've attached an email chain with my administrator. I've attached a transcript of a conversation with a CNP worker about an issue that we noticed. Okay, whatever you have. I've attached an email chain, a student impact statement. I've attached this. You're really literally going to talk about what you're attaching, because what we think is obvious may not be obvious to your assessor on what it is that you're attaching. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the student need, the professional learning need, how those work within the component, or anything about this part of C4?
There are not any in the chat at this moment. We can give everybody a couple seconds maybe to process before we move on. But I think you must have really crushed this section. They have no questions.
Thank you. This part was really hard for me to understand. So I find that a lot of times when something's difficult for me to understand, I try the explain it like I'm five, and I try to explain
Yeah.
it the way that it functions in my brain, and sometimes my brain just works a little bit differently than everyone else's. Okay,
Okay, Gina, we've got a great clarifying question that just popped up. So the last section, so student need is what we just talked about, does not have to be a learning need. Is that she's clarifying?
No, I remember from Amber's, and I'm going to mention Amber a million times because she's just amazing. I remember she talked about a coat drive. She did a coat drive for her kids that she literally noticed the kids were coming in without jackets on, and it bothered her. And she did a coat drive, and it was because of a single student that she was worried about. And so to meet the need of that baby, she did a coat drive for a bunch of kids and met that need.
Yeah.
This can be anything for your kids. You might have a kid who has suffered a loss, and you work through something to help that student process their grief. Like I said, I have a lot of students who are very involved in extracurricular activities, but they struggle mightily academically. I had a student this year who was living in a hoarding situation, and I think, Child Protective Services had to be called in several times. And there were several times that I went out of my way with other teachers to meet some of the students' personal hygiene needs and some of the things that I worried a lot of times that she was coming to school hungry, and we would do things, to make her life easier. There's so many different things. I want you to think outside of you're an amazing teacher and you do all of these things for instruction, but that is not all that we do. We are social workers, we are nurses, we are emotional coaches, we're academic coaches, life coaches, we're so many more things. Think outside of what you're doing in your classroom to meet instructional needs, and what else are you doing?
Yeah.
And that can really give you a glimpse.
I think one of the things I like to refer to for this is like Core Prop 1 says teachers are committed to students and their learning. It's not that teachers are just committed to student learning. We are, but we're committed to that whole child and their learning. Tanya says, I started a school store with food and snacks for my students. Would that qualify? Yes.
Yeah.
If you can justify, like, how did you know this was a need? How did you collaborate to meet that need? Then yes. I have another question. If I'm working on a need with another NBCT candidate, could we both use that need in our portfolio? I think as long as you don't use each other's writing, I don't see why the project or task that you're tackling couldn't be shared.
Yeah, I don't see anything with that either. I don't recall reading anything like that. And make sure that your evidence is varied, that you're not using the same email chain, meeting notes or anything like that. You work together and vary out your evidence, and that's all. That's the collaboration.
Do we have to think of something? Oh, and I see a raised hand. Let me do this one in the chat, and then we'll let you unmute. Do we have to think of something new, or can we use the information from a learning committee we're already a part of? For example, I'm involved in the diversity program, so I could reference that even though I didn't initiate or think of this program at my school.
I think that would work. And because I'm looking at your instructions right now, and it says that for this one, you will describe a student need that you identified that required all of these things. And it says up to 24 months prior to the ePortfolio submission window. So your submission window is going to open up in the spring of 2026, right? So anything within that 24 months leading up to it. For example, we had a student loss last year where we had a student who passed away. And I might be thinking in my head, you know what, my students really struggled with that. So I'm going to start a grief counseling group in my school based on this need that I knew that existed. You're part of that diversity group. You've probably seen some issues come up because of your involvement in that group. And you can go ahead and start to use that information now. And you're probably also collaborating with people. So you're killing multiple birds with that one stone. Yeah, go for it. That would work.
Okay, is it Melita? I may not be saying it right, but go ahead.
That's fine. Hi. At my school, I teach seniors, and their biggest thing is the anxiety because they're about to graduate. Plus, with everything that's going on in the world, they're just completely anxiety driven, especially after COVID. So what I've done is part of an SEL, social emotional learning. I can teach meditation, so I've done that. So my 5-minute warm up is actually a 5-minute meditation where we do different breathing exercises. So that was based on a need. And I knew it worked because one child who's a fighter came in and she's like, Miss Hay, I just went straight into the breathing. And I was like, oh my God, it works. Okay. And so that calmed her down. But how do I show that? What's the evidence that I use?
I'm thinking impact statement all the way there. I mean, imagine how beautiful that would be for this student to come in and, to write this little email. When I had my student write about the impact of the Black History Month program, she talked about that. She said, I felt underrepresented. I felt looked over sometimes, but after I saw the posters in the hallway and I heard students in the lunchroom discussing some of the facts that were mentioned on the announcements that morning, it just made me, and that was all she said. She said, it just made me feel like I matter more. So imagine your student writing that impact statement where she says, I was prone to be a fighter. I had been suspended before, but after Miss Hay taught me these breathing strategies, I became upset one day. I practiced the breathing strategies that Miss Hay taught me, and I avoided a confrontation. Boom.
Can I also do impact statements from the counselors, the dean on that student?
I don't think there's any problem with that. So make sure that your evidence again is varied because you want to show evidence of the need, evidence of the impact, and evidence with collaboration, with other people. So your collaboration with other people may be that you collaborate with a counselor for this student and then deciding where your evidence would come from. I think that'd be great.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome.
Okay, I think the last question. So just going back to the types of evidence for this section,
Sure.
Can we use Facebook posts, parent notes from home, photos of book snack drive for my project?
For photos, for Facebook posts, I would make sure that you're careful about formatting to make sure to preserve anonymity in all situations. Yes, I don't think there's any problems with what else did she mention? She said
So
like
we had Facebook posts, parent notes, no, home for sure.
yes.
Photos of the book or snack drive, yes. As long as we preserve anonymity again.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I used email chains on several different parts of components, and I would just make sure to black out parts. And look, if you are confused about formatting on a computer, print it out, pull a big Sharpie across it, take a picture of it, and call it done. Yeah, you'll be fine.
Okay. All right. I think that's it.
All right, awesome. Let's talk about our big beast here, the written commentary, all 12 pages that you're going to end up writing. And this is going to feel like so much, but when you think about C4, I want you to remember my mantra here that your forms have done a lot of work for you, okay? The forms, they're not just asking you to write these forms and then asking you to regurgitate that information in the written commentary. The information that you've provided in the forms is the appetizer for your people, okay? You got your little bacon wrap weenies over here with your forms, and now you're ready to give them some sliders later on, and you're ready to do all this with your written commentary. Written commentary can be a very overwhelming and confusing process, and I want to try to give you some tips and tricks to help you get through this, and a lot of the information that you're seeing here can help you on other components as well, okay? So the way that you write for the national board is not going to be like anything that you're ever used to. I am an essay research paper writing fool, okay? Give me an 11:59 and 59-second deadline. I will start writing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I will just turn out something that's amazing for you. If I tell you a million times, let me tell you that this process is not that. If you think that you will spit out written commentary in one day, you're probably not going to be able to do it unless you're a superhuman. And if you are a superhuman, please let me know your tricks. This written commentary process will make you double think, triple think yourself. So I want to give you some tips and tricks to help you. You won't have any room for fluff. You're not trying to meet a page deadline. You're trying to stay within the page deadline. They're going to give you 12 pages. You're going to feel like you could use 20. Okay. You're going to have to figure out how to shorten things up. So here are some of the tips that I live by. I recommend that you set up your document with formatting before you begin. Some people will tell you to just start writing and live your life, but I find that if you are realistic about the way that your writing is going to look at the end, it can sometimes help you avoid word vomit, and it can help you see things in real time, okay? So set up your margins. We know you have to have 1-inch margins, 11-point Arial font, you have to double space in your written commentary. So don't go in single spacing. Don't go in with a 10-point font. Don't do those things to yourself. Put it out there in the exact format that you know you're going to have to do it. You're going to see it and it's going to be real. I recommend that you put a running head at the top of all of your written commentary documents. This isn't in the instructions, but I like something that looks nice and that looks pretty on formatting. And to be honest with you, it helped me when I was merging my PDFs to remember what I was doing, okay? So on your running head, I put C4, written commentary, and then over on the opposite side, I put my candidate ID. That was all I put up there in my running head. You can put that running head on C2, C3, C4, put it wherever you want to, and that way it's nice, okay? If you're using Microsoft Word, which I personally recommend, Word offers you more control. Google Docs is great, but it's free for everybody to use, which means that you're not getting some of the premium features that you get with Word. However, with my saying that I prefer Word, if you use Docs, it's going to work just fine for you. I help people who certify with Docs all the time, okay? But if you have Word, turn off widows and orphans. Sometimes Word will clip the last line from your document and push it down to the next page. And if you turn off widows and orphans, you get an extra line on your page that you may not have gotten. You can turn on auto hyphenation in Microsoft Word. And when you're typing, it will hyphenate words for you and clip it down to the next line and give you more room. I also just realized that I forgot to mention turn on your justification feature. Do not left align. You know, we always left align, and then the other side of your document looks like a little wavy thing. Turn on justification, but turn it on before you start typing. And what justification does, I'll share a nerd moment with you here. I collect typewriters, and used to, when you would type with a typewriter, your pica or the size of your font was set, and there were a set amount of spaces that you could get on a line. If you turn on justification, word processing software has the ability to slightly edit the way that words work together, and it'll help you get more words on a single line. I have seen people turn on justification and give themselves 4 or 5 extra lines at the end of a document. Turn on justification. Put page numbers on the bottom. It'll help you remember. And also, if you print a document out, you take it to a mentor, or if you're like me, I need to print documents so that I can edit them. Like I have to edit old school with a red pen. I can keep my numbers in order and pay attention to the headings. I'm actually looking at my own instructions here, and it says things like add the headings that says like knowledge of students, generation and use of assessment data. You're required to put those headings in there, but it won't be like what you've done with MLA or APA where you have the heading and then you create another paragraph. You're just going to put the heading in there and keep going. The way that your written commentary is going to look might make your brain hurt, okay? I've talked about Microsoft Word versus Docs, but I want that to be a personal preference for you. You may not have access to Word. I paid the $10 a month during the process, worth every penny. I loved it. Bold the first few words of each bullet. Again, you're not required to do this. This is just going to be a tip for me to give you. If you notice on your written commentary, there are bullet points. And there are multiple questions nested underneath each bullet. If you bold the first couple of words of each bullet point, it's going to help you know, okay, that was my first bullet point, that was my second one. And it can help sometimes your mentors pick up on missed questions, missed opportunities for information, and it'll help you see where you're moving in your document. Like I said, this can help you and a mentor see if all of your questions are being answered. I swear by this for my mentees, and I swore by this for myself as well. You're not required to do any of these things. But as someone who's certified here and who helps mentees every session, it really does make a difference for them to say, no, that was where our question is. Do you see it's right there? Because we miss things and you miss things too. Okay. I'll go back over these tips and tricks if you need them, but I'm going to move to the next set of them. Okay. Some say to bold the language from the National Board Standards, but bolding takes up more space, okay? So I'm very strategic with my use of bolding. I found this to be a waste of space for me for bolding the standards language. My personal recommendation is that if you've read your standards, you've read your prompts, they are going to become ingrained in what you do. You do not want to parrot the language back at your assessor. Your assessor knows those standards, and so do you. You want to answer your questions without being overly florid, okay? So you want to do it organically. When it says, what steps did you take to ensure the assessment results provided, you don't want to say, a consistent assessment is, your assessor knows those things. I ensured my assessment was consistent by doing this, right? And then I'm going to answer that question. I don't need to go parrot the language back at my assessor. They know. If your prompt says, cite specific examples, this is where your money is, especially on C3 and on C4. C4 asks you to cite specific examples several times. One of the times that it does it, and I'm going to show you some of the prompts here in a second, it says, cite specific examples from the submitted evidence. So I'm asked about the patterns, trends, and outliers in the results from the formative assessment data. Then it says, cite specific evidence. For example, on assessment 1, James incorrectly added -3 and +5, and he got -8. This showed me what? It's specific evidence. I also I was another level here. If I talked about a piece of evidence in my commentary, I highlighted it yellow. I was not going to make my assessor go look for anything. And I swear that part of that is the reason that I scored a 4 on this component, because it just all worked so beautifully together. And when I'm asked to cite specific evidence, if it's in your evidence, talk about it in your commentary too, okay? If you ever feel like you're repeating yourself, and I promise there will come a day where you go, they've already asked me this question. Why am I mentioning this again? You're likely either missing a part of the prompt or you're misunderstanding what's being asked. There's a natural build to the way that these commentary questions work in order to pull the information from you to help you score well with your rubric. So what we're going to do next is we're actually going to look at the set of questions from the generation and use of assessment data section from C4. And I want to show you some of the things that you should look for in your written commentary prompts that will help you see the build of the way to answer the questions to ensure that your written commentary is going to make you hit that 4. Because your goal is not a 2.5. Your goal is not a 3. Your goal is a 4.25. You want to hit it so far out of the park that your assessor goes, yes, yes. And yes, that's what you want. And this is what I want to show you. One more thing here. I've mentioned already, pay attention to and or, okay? You can use abbreviations. As a matter of fact, abbreviations are going to be your best friend, and they just broke my brain as an English teacher. Don't use and, use the ampersand. The ampersand is 1 space. The word and takes up 3 letters. We're going to use and. We're going to use BC for because. You're going to use W/ for with or just a W. Instead of saying formative assessment, FA, capitalize it. Instead of saying summative assessment, SA. Instead of saying student self-assessment, SSA. Students, capital S, little s. Only thing is, the first time that you use that abbreviation, you're going to say, for this formative assessment, FA, you're going to go on after that. Don't overload it though. I have seen people that start to go crazy with abbreviations. Don't do that. You probably don't need to tell what an IEP is. They'll know what an IEP is, right? But anything else that you add in your little abbreviations, go for it. Get rid of the word that. It takes up space and it's almost never necessary. For example, this shows me that 20% of my students, no, this shows 20%. Yep, that's it. And I can take out all those extra words. Take out extra spaces. Some of us old school people that learned to work on maybe typewriters or word processing before it is like it is now, we hit the space bar twice after the ends of our periods because that was what we were taught to do. If that's you, don't do it anymore. Took me a while to break that habit, but make sure that you're not hitting your space bar twice there. Use contractions. No one is going to come and pop you over the head if you say the word won't. These students won't work well together. That's fine. Go for it, okay? Follow page recommendations. Try to keep formatting while you're working. There's nothing worse than something. I've had people bring me 12 pages of single-spaced word written commentary before, and I just have to look at them and go, Okay, this is 24 pages of double-spaced commentary. If they had double-spaced it at the beginning, it would have helped them a lot. So try to do those little things if you can. All right, this is your actual prompts from C4 for your second section, where it says generation and use of assessment data. You're going to notice here that you have 7 different bullet points. So in this part of your written commentary, I would see 7 parts of bolded words where like the first 2 to 3 words would be bolded, and that's going to help me see where I'm going here. Notice I've circled the words and or here so that you can see what we have. These 7 questions ask you a lot of different things, and this is going to take up about 5 pages of your written commentary. But if we look at the way that these questions are over to the side in these bullet points, I've created what I think shows a natural build. So the first bullet point is basically asking me how I designed my unit. It says, how did you use knowledge of the class that you collected and developed? And look at what I said here. Notice how this section is building on what I already talked about, my knowledge of students. How did you use this knowledge and the unit objectives to inform the planning of this unit? Okay, if I said that this class is not talkative, I said that they are the most quiet class ever. They have the lowest levels of participation that I've ever seen. What did I do to make my quiet kids come out of their shell and show me that they understand how to analyze literature? Specifically, how did that knowledge inform the kinds of assessment that I planned and any modifications that would be necessary for da 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 da? So first thing it's asking me, how did I design my unit? My second bullet point says, how did you design your assessments? And notice it says, what steps did you take to ensure the assessment results from the assessment? So formative and summative, not just formative and not just summative. How did I make sure that every result of every assessment was going to be consistent, fair, and accurate? This is where we control F. What is the difference between consistency, fairness, and accuracy? National Board has some words about that for you. Now, third bullet point is going to ask me about assessment data analysis, only my formative assessment. So first I'm going to say, this is how I designed my unit. This is how I designed my assessments. Now I'm going to talk about, this is what I did for my formative assessments. Next bullet points, what adjustments did I make to my unit? And I did this with every one of my pieces of written commentary. I would look at these questions and I would go, what is it wanting me to do? Bullet point this out. You tell your students to read things and to make notes, you do it. Do what you tell your students to do. It's helpful. Next, you're asked to talk about summative assessment data, not formative assessment. I've already beat that horse, okay? Now, I'm going to talk about my summative assessment. Next, student self-assessment only. How did I support students' use of self-assessment during the unit to achieve the objectives? I mentioned a whole bunch of unit objectives back in my little form, right? I mentioned all of my unit objectives of what my babies are going to be doing. Now, how did I use self-assessment to help them? And then finally, for this question, I'm asked about how did I apply knowledge I accumulated through multiple sources and my assessments to inform future instruction? And what does it tell me to do? Be sure to cite specific examples. So I have to talk about things that I did next with these kids as a result of, I noticed that this kid was doing this on his assessment, so I did this. Okay? This is a lot with these prompts. I heartily recommend that you annotate the prompts before you ever sit down to answer them. It can help you. Okay.
That's just letting you know. So 10-minute warning on time.
Sure.
And then there's no current active questions in the chat. So
awesome. All right. We're getting really close. So now submission at a glance. This submission at a glance form is in every component that you have. It's a lot. Okay. This little table has a lot of information. This information, though, is beautiful because it's going to be mirrored when you do log into the portfolio submission. You're going to see the exact same words. It's going to have a spot that says contextual information sheet, and you're going to upload a file. And if you notice here, it says submit one file that includes. What does it tell you to include? A single form. Does it tell you to merge anything with it? Nope, it doesn't tell you to do anything. So what are you going to submit there? One little file. Then the next part says knowledge of students. Form is provided to you. It's going to be a PDF. And in my one little file that I'm going to submit here, what am I doing? My form and 2 pages of evidence. And that's it. Label evidence appropriately. Do whatever you have to do. But take a look at that next one. You have to submit 3 files for generation of use, generation of and use of assessment data. So my 3 files, and it tells you what to put there, okay? So look closely at the number of files. Everything here is going to be in PDF format. I personally recommend the Adobe PDF Merge. It was free online, but my service center teaches people to use Cami and Canva. And look, it's half a dozen of one, 6 of the other. If you merge your PDFs together successfully, it does not matter what tool you use. As long as they come out the other end, I want you to use whatever you're comfortable with. Give yourself time to download your combined files and triple check them. Do not be the person in the Facebook group freaking out the night before submissions because you don't know how to merge your PDFs. Get that done. Tell yourself, I want to be done 2 weeks before submission window. And then you have time to freak out, download them again, look at them, have a colleague look at them, have everybody check them, and you're going to be good. You're going to have 8 files totaling 38 pages. So get everything combined correctly. Don't procrastinate. That takes time. I think it took me about a day to make sure all my files were done correctly because you make mistakes. Okay. All right. Questions about the submission at a glance form. It's your Bible. It's where you want to live.
Can you say again what you use for merging, if you could repeat?
Adobe Merge. And so if you just Google Adobe PDF Merge, a little website will pop up and you can do it. I'm not sure if there's any issues with paying for it. I did not pay for merging any of mine. You can merge PDFs with Cami. Your school may have a Cami account. That's Kami. A lot of schools have a Canva account. I know my school has a premium Canva account attached to it. And at the end of the day, if you are confused, ask your instructional coach, a tech coach in your area, or your local mentoring cohort will be glad to help you. Or if you freak out, send me an email and I'll help you out. Okay. All right. Couple of reminders here because I know we're getting close to the end. I want to say that your chance of certification increases with support. Only 30 to 40% of candidates achieve certification on the first attempt with no support. Okay, so you're already pushing past that. 68% achieve with regional service support, and 74% of people achieve on the first submission when they go through the process with another candidate in their same certification area. Do not do this by yourself. Bobby Faulkner's books are there. Get them. If you do not know who Bobby Faulkner is, you Google her name and it will pop up. She has 3 sets of books. She's amazing. The little sentence stems and everything inside of her books are amazing and lots of no-nonsense tips. I want to talk about AI very quickly. This is something very new. This was not an issue when I went through the process. You may not use any part of AI to write any part of your written commentary. Rules say that you can only use AI for grammar and spell check alone. You have to disclose the use of AI in creating instructional materials. My personal recommendation, don't use AI during this process. I know that there are a lot of different attitudes. I know that people feel very differently about AI. I'm becoming very wary of it. It is not a human. It's making lots of errors. It's not a good writer. It doesn't create great resources for us. Triple check everything and don't use AI. I can't tell you how many people are in the Facebook groups admitting to using AI, and it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying me. Final thoughts. You may want to write this down. If you email Bobby Faulkner at nbwhatworks@gmail.com and you put the word timeline as your subject line, she will send you options for calendars that pace out for 1 year or 2 years for submission, and she'll literally tell you the order to do everything. She'll tell you what to do in August, September, October, November, all the way through. The calendar is a lifesaver. Bobby Faulkner is amazing. She manages the Facebook groups and she wrote the books with the sentence stems. Reach out to your local in-service center. I know here in our region, Valerie Curtis has made sure that we have access to these books as needed. The sentence stems alone are worth their weight in gold. Okay, get those books. For Facebook, I do want to tell you about the great Facebook groups that exist. And I want to say that those Facebook groups are amazing. I did find them very helpful. If you search my name in the Facebook groups, you're going to see lots of different documents that I created to share. I do want to tell you, look for group experts and people who contribute often. Use the search feature inside of each one of the groups. Odds are your question has already been asked. And if you're like me, I start to commiserate with people when they get stressed. So as the deadline started to approach and people were coming unglued, I had to unfollow the groups for a little while, because as the deadline approaches, you're going to see more bad information and more people who are procrastinated, and it's going to make you freak out. Or maybe I'm just the most anxious person in the world. But when people start, I have to unfollow. And even now, as a mentor, and I go in, I try to answer questions, I eventually have to unfollow the groups in April because they become unhinged. Okay. Here are your orders. Read your standards. Read them again. Understand your instructions. Read those again. Join your local cohort. Make a plan. Email Bobby. Get her timelines. They're amazing. Do not procrastinate. This is not college. If you procrastinate here, you're going to hurt yourself, and you're not going to be mentally, emotionally, and socially available for the people that you love. Don't make any plans for spring break. Lock yourself in for spring break next year. Tell yourself that your spring break is off the board. I wrote entire C4 from Saturday at the beginning of spring break through the Sunday of spring break. I produced C4. I had done all the work, of course, in the classroom, but I produced my C4 over spring break, and it was an amazing thing, and it was great. So, does anyone have any questions or anything? I know that I have probably driven you crazy. This is a lot of information, but I want you to feel comfortable asking questions. And if you don't have time today, please email me. I'm available at especially my NBCT email. You send me an email. I try to respond to those. I'll be in school, but I also still make time to respond to people to help them out.
Okay, I don't see. So somebody said they didn't receive a recording for a previous session. Those have not gone out yet. So like resources and recordings have not been sent out yet. We'll make sure that that gets to you guys. Is there a visual to see spacing and formatting for titles and subheadings? I don't know of a visual, but it's not.
But I've considered creating one.
Yeah.
Could be something that I actually create, because we can't share our own examples, but it would be interesting to create one and then just kind of let someone see it and let it just be filled with nonsense words. That might be something that I create to share with my local mentees, and I'll send those out to these service centers to maybe help, just because it can be helpful for people who are visual to see it.
And then Crystal's asking about just any tips for staying organized. There are a lot of moving parts here. So
I think I've said this a million times, I'm very old school. This binder right here, I had 3 different binders. So inside of this binder, and this is literally the binder that I went through the process with, I did everything in tabs, and then I had an actual little plastic suitcase sort of thing, and then I had it in dividers, and everything that my students did, I kept everything. Everything. When you're teaching your C4 unit, keep every piece of student work that your students do. When you're doing C3, pick multiple students to keep work for. When you're doing C2, keep more student work than you think you need to. You can always throw it away, but having to go back in and recreate student work is a nightmare. I recommend multiple binders if it's very helpful for you to do things that way. And that's just kind of how I did everything. Everything was done in binders, and I kept everything in an accordion file. And I kind of walked around with massive suitcases for months. I still have every student work that my students did in its original format for National Board. I kept it all.
Yep. And people really want you to do that sample visual, just so you know. So there's a lot of energy for that.
I put in my email at the beginning of the session. I'm going to go ahead and pull that back up real quick. I put in my email at the beginning of the session. I'm going to try to create that and get that back out to the local cohorts. But if they don't get that back out, send me an email. If you do the erussell.nbct@gmail.com, I'll work on creating that here over the next couple of days, and I'll get that out to you guys. I am traveling to Montgomery to present C4 again tomorrow. So I'll be on the move tomorrow. But if you would like a copy of that visual sample and you're a little bit less patient, just drop me an email real quick and ask me for one, and I'll send you a sample of what a good written commentary might look like. It won't have any actual information in it. It'll just kind of be a visual for you of, we don't make paragraphs, we just keep writing and whatever else. And that way it might help some of you guys take a little bit of that edge off.
All right, and then I see a question about the attendance survey. I'll put that in the chat. But remember, if you did it in a previous session, you're good for the day. So it's not for individual session, but I did put that back in the chat, and I put my email in the chat.
And that's
Also here to be
cell
a
phone
thought
number.
partner.
That's my actual cell phone number there. Like if you send me a text message, I'm good about answering text messages. I'm not one of those people who has 50 unread messages. If I see one unread text message, it sends me into overdrive. And I'm the same way with my email notifications. So just send me an email or a text message. And I would not have made it through this process without people pouring into me. And I can't tell you that how many times I need to say that. Amber's video for C4 was my mantra. Amy Box, my mentor, was amazing to me. My person, Tammy Bailey, who went through the process with me, she wasn't in my content area, but just having someone, I went to my mentoring meetings at my local cohort. I went to the writing retreat that we do. I did all of these things because I knew that this wasn't getting my master's degree or my EDS. It's not even getting my EDD that I'm going to work on. This is a whole different ball game. And I didn't want to be the one who didn't certify that first time because I knew, I was like, I'm this teacher. And so you reach out to other people and you talk to them. I can promise you something as simple as a text message question to someone who's been through this process can help settle your nerves. Reach out to other people. Don't go by this. Don't go through this by yourself. Get some help and you just reach out to other people and we are more than happy to help you and love you through this process.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us and seeing your lovely thank yous in the session. Glad it was helpful. Beth, thank you so much for your expertise and your time. And we will hopefully hear from you guys soon and celebrate with y'all soon. So,
all right. Thanks, guys. Y'all have a great one today.